Before we begin, a quick warning. Tennessee True Crime contains detailed descriptions and images of real-life violence. Some listeners and viewers may find the material deeply disturbing. This content is intended for mature audiences only. And remember, the goal of sharing these stories is not to sensationalize tragedy, but to honor the victims, understand the truth, and give voice to those who can no longer speak for themselves. Listener discretion is strongly advised. This show opening is brought to you by Namaste Wellness and Aesthetics. Visit Namaste this entire month of February for 20% off of all skincare needs, $50 off of filler, and $9 per unit of Botox. Go visit the awesome ladies at Namaste at 159 Omni Drive right here in McMinnville, Tennessee. Now, on to the story. In small-town Tennessee, there are places where roads narrow until they feel like corridors, where the trees lean in, where cell service drops and time feels a little softer, slower. Dry Creek in Smithville, Tennessee is one of those places. And what makes places like Dry Creek dangerous isn't just isolation. Everyone knows everyone. And when something feels off, people tell themselves, it's none of my business. But minding your business can give violence room to grow. This is not a story that explodes in a single moment. It decays. It escalates. It unfolds over days of fear, sleeplessness, and drug-fueled paranoia until cruelty stops feeling shocking and starts feeling justified. This is the case of Roger Zammit and John Harry. They say the South never forgets, and Tennessee, she remembers everything. Welcome to Tennessee True Crime, where the shadows of the volunteer state's past meet the stories that refuse to be forgotten. I'm your host, Tiffany Morgan. Each week, we dig into twisted tales of betrayal, violence, and mystery. The ones where whispers carry truth, and the answers are never as simple as they seem. Let's step into the dark and piece together the clues. Because in Tennessee, some secrets still haunt the hills. This is Tennessee True Crime.
Down through the smoky hollers where the cold wind sighs, footsteps fall where the moonlight hides, whispers over rivers, a secret lost in time. Welcome to Tennessee True Crime.
Before he was a defendant, before jurors stared at crime scene photographs, before his name was attached to the words heinous and cruel, Chris Tatro was admired. He was a standout rodeo cowboy, two-time Tennessee Cowboy of the Year, good enough to earn a rodeo scholarship to UT Martin. People described him as hardworking and dependable, someone who showed up. He married young. He had 2 sons. He held steady jobs, worked his parents' farm, but rodeo destroys bodies. A serious back injury followed by a leg injury ended his competitive career. The pain didn't fade. And in the early 1990s, pain management in rural America didn't look like physical therapy and long-term care. It looked like pills. And eventually, that gave way to methamphetamine. At first, it helped him function, and then it absolutely consumed him. By late 1994, witnesses testified that Chris Tatro was using methamphetamine heavily alongside cocaine, marijuana, alcohol, and other prescription drugs. At trial, testimony indicated that he was using up to 2 grams of methamphetamine per day. That is not recreational use. That is living inside of a chemically altered reality, one where fear feels rational and aggression feels necessary. Eventually, his marriage collapsed. He lost his job, and to support his addiction, he began selling drugs. The trailer where he lived became what witnesses later called a party place. People stayed for days, some for weeks. Others drifted in and out at all hours. His family checked on him, but he pushed them away. Now, while Tatro was visiting someone in Texas, someone broke into his trailer. What was taken was not just valuable, it was personal. Nearly 100 rodeo belt buckles, a Navajo blanket from a close friend of his that had been killed, an antique knife collection, his great-grandfather's coin purse, tools, guns. So he reported the burglary. And soon, names began circulating. It's a small town. Those names were Roger Zammit, John Harry, and Billy Teal. Now, whether those names were accurate or fueled by paranoia, that was debated at trial. But in Chris Tatro's mind, the guilt was settled. 2 weeks before the murders, tensions escalated further. Chris Tatro and several others went to Billy Teal's house. Now, according to testimony, Billy Teal and his father held Chris Tatro and his buddies at gunpoint for over an hour, took photographs of them, and warned Chris Tatro, forget about your stolen property. Then shots were fired into Chris Tatro's property. One bullet killed his German Shepherd. For somebody that was already living in fear, this was not coincidence. It was confirmation. From that moment on, witnesses said that Chris Tatro believed an attack was coming. He armed himself. He stopped sleeping, and he started watching. On Thursday, January 12th, a guy named Kenny Mason drove Chris Tatro to a cabin owned by John Harry in the Dry Creek area. Others arrived soon after, including Dondi Billings, who had been staying at the cabin, Christy Mulligan, a friend, and Billings' boyfriend, Roger Zammit. Now, when Zammit opened the trunk of the car, Tatro saw a toolbox that he believed had been stolen from his trailer. An argument ensued, and then it turned physical. The two men fought each other. Each of them swapped blows. And then Tatro pulled a butterfly knife, and that was that. The fight ended, and everybody went inside. Now, I don't know if I'm going inside with somebody that just pulled a knife on me, but, you know. Inside the cabin, drugs were cooked in the microwave, because why not? Kenny Mason, who had driven Chris there, stood guard with a butcher knife. After a while, Chris Tatro announced that they could all go back to his place to, quote-unquote, party. Now, Dondi Billings and John Harry stayed behind, but on the way back to the trailer, more people would be invited and find their way to the party, including Mike Redman, Bruce Rockford, Philip Lawrence, J.J. Hendrickson, Jeff Sanders, and Tony Davis. What seemed like a good time turned out not to be at all. This was the moment the door closed, the moment that escape stopped being easy. Over the next 2 days, that trailer became fortified. Witnesses testified that someone was almost always positioned at the door with a shotgun, watching for movement. No one slept for long, not more than an hour or two. Methamphetamine and cocaine and marijuana and alcohol, everything was consumed constantly. People were convinced that John Harry or Billy Teal were coming to kill them. They became obsessed with the idea of it. And in that environment, Roger Zammit, who was already there, became the focus. The same guy who had been confronted and swapped licks with him just a while earlier over a stolen toolbox. Yeah, he came to the party. Once suspicion hardened on him, Roger Zammit was never free to leave. So once Roger Zammit could see the severity of the situation that he was in, he tried to remedy some of it and tell Chris Tatro where some of his belongings were. They even drove to right here in McMinnville, Tennessee to recover a stolen gun. But when they got back, there was no leniency given for the recovered gun. What you will find out about what was done to these men will be hard to hear. You think these things happen in movies. You think it doesn't happen in small towns. Think again. Things happen in our own back doors that you can never imagine. And if you listen to last week's show, you already know that. And in some ways, this story is even worse than that one. Roger Zammit was ordered to stand with his hands raised. He was struck repeatedly in the ribs and the face. He was slapped. He was kicked. At one point, Chris Tatro held an empty revolver to Roger Zammit's head and pulled the trigger multiple times. This wasn't impulse. This was psychological torture. And it wasn't just Chris Tatro participating in these things. Make no mistake of that. Roger Zammit was cut with a knife. Small, shallow incisions to his arm and flank. Chunks of his hair were cut away. Tiny incisions were cut into his scalp. His earlobe was torn when an earring was ripped from it. And yet, after all this happened, he was still allowed to shower. His wounds were treated. They wrapped his ribs in ace wrap. He was fed. And at one point, he lay on Chris Tatro's bed with his girlfriend, Dondi Billings, during the day. This contradiction confused jurors, but it didn't confuse the court. Temporary kindness does not negate captivity. It reinforces it. Imagine going through this torture and then having someone feed and care for you. I think that would mess with me even more. I mean, I would have some hope that they were realizing what they were doing and decide to let me go, but I think I would also realize deep down that people like that don't often let their victims go after they've done something like that, and especially when you've seen their face and let alone know full well who they are. Sometime on Friday afternoon or Friday evening, Chris Tatro and the others decided that Roger Zammit wasn't the only guy that was going to pay. They went and brought John Harry to the trailer. They tied him spread eagle in a chair in the laundry room. Chris Tatro repeatedly threw a knife over and over into the exposed portion of the chair seat between Harry's legs. Witnesses testified that Chris Tatro later bragged about tying John Harry to a telephone pole and whipping him with a belt. A woman who briefly stopped by the trailer testified about seeing the welt on John Harry's back. He was kicked violently, striking his face against a vanity. Blood spilled onto the carpet. He had visible cuts on his face, a deep gash on his leg, and bruising. Now, Chris Tatro bandaged up John Harry's wounds himself, and after being allowed to shower, he was made a pallet in the bedroom where he was allowed to lay down. And that act of bandaging and caring for the wounds would matter later because it showed awareness of the injuries. And awareness of the injuries means awareness of suffering. On Saturday morning, Chris Tatro and Mike Redmond called Dondi Billings' parents, and that afternoon her parents arrived to take her home. Now, Billings testified that Tatro got on his knees and swore that he would take Roger Zammit and John Harry home once she and Christy Mulligan left. Right. Her father saw Roger Zammit standing on the porch and warned him to stay away from my daughter. I have so many questions about this. Why would Dondi not call someone immediately and tell them what was happening inside that trailer? I get you're scared, but so are they. You're there witnessing someone torture your boyfriend, and then bring someone else in to torture them, and you believe anything they say? Another question. Roger was just outside on the porch and didn't scream and tell them to call for help or run while there was a witness. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure I don't know how I would react in that situation if it were me being tortured, but I dang sure know if I see it happening, I'm not keeping my mouth shut and waiting for someone to die. And wouldn't you know it, Roger Zammit and John Harry were never taken home. Chris Tatro did, however, take Roger Zammit to look for pain medication. Now, after taking a Xanax and drinking beer, Roger Zammit passed out. Chris Tatro left him slumped in the truck that was parked in the yard. Now, Amber Frederick, who had been there when everyone arrived and was taking a nap, she left and then returned briefly. She became upset and refused to stay, but not upset enough to call police. 30 minutes later, Chris Tatro's mother arrived. She later testified about her own son, saying that he looked crazy, clearly strung out on drugs. And when she tried to reason with him and talk to him about it, he absolutely erupted in a fit of rage. So she left without ever stepping foot inside or knowing what was going on in that trailer. Parents remember moments like that forever. The last normal conversation, if you want to call it normal, the last chance that they feel like they could have intervened. After she drove away, the witnesses said that Chris Tatro absolutely went nuts. He took his frustration out on John Harry, who was laying on that pallet on the floor, poking him in the eyes with a styrofoam bat before his friend, Jeff Sanders, joined in and started kicking and hitting John Harry in the face all over again. Now, because there was so much blood, Chris Tatro wanted John Harry put in the tub. And after that, they went and dragged Roger Zammit out of the truck by his hair. Now, inside the bathroom, duct tape was applied to both of their hands and mouths, and tape was placed over Roger Zammit's eyes. Roger Zammit was forced to kneel in the bathtub facing the faucets. John Harry was placed into the tub behind him. Multiple people were in and out of that bathroom. That means multiple people had a chance to stop this. Multiple people could have left and gone for help, knowing this was going too far, but they didn't. Now, Kenny Mason later testified that when he returned after stepping away briefly, Roger Zammit had a plastic bag over his head and a cord wrapped around his neck. He said that Chris Tatro had his knee pressed into Zammit's back and was pulling hard on the cord. Mason described it as looking like Chris Tatro was riding a bull. When Roger Zammit continued to struggle, Chris Tatro asked for a heavy flashlight and struck him 3 times in the back of his head. Roger Zammit just wilted away lifelessly, but he wasn't dead. And when someone let Chris Tatro know that he wasn't dead, he returned to the bathroom and told John Harry, who was still restrained, to pull the cord around Roger Zammit's neck. And while Harry pulled on that cord, Chris Tatro stood there and watched and laughed. Roger Zammit died right there in that bathtub. Medical testimony would later establish that this took time. 30 seconds, possibly several minutes. That means opportunity, and no one took it. Not to mention, people repeatedly left that trailer to go eat, get food, liquor, cigarettes, left to get a shower and clean clothes, and came back, and still no one did the right thing. So after Roger Zamet's death, the men sat at the kitchen table for about 20 minutes, smoking cigarettes and marijuana, leaving John Harry in that tub with the man he was just forced to kill. They decided to raise a window because it smelled bad in there. Then Chris Tatro told Kenny Mason and the others to help him get John Harry out of the bathtub and out of the house. They walked him through the front door and into a nearby field. Once he got through a gate, John Harry ran. He saw a chance. He wanted to fight for his life. He wanted a chance at living, but he fell. Chris Tatro caught up to him, dragged him up, told him to keep walking. And when he did, he kicked him in the leg. As John Harry fell again, Chris Tatro fired one shot from a .22 caliber rifle into the side of John Harry's head. Harry lost consciousness almost immediately, and death followed shortly after. Over the next several hours, the men would spend their time cleaning up their mess. They tried to do a thorough crime scene cleanup, everything you would think of. Bloody carpet was cut out, towels and clothing were burned down at Goose Creek, but the inside of the trailer wasn't the only issue. There were 2 bodies left to deal with. Both bodies were wrapped in woven wire fencing and then in carpet. And then Chris Tatro, Mike Redman, and J.J. Hendrickson left to dispose of them. They were dumped in Center Hill Lake. Now, meanwhile, Kenny Mason got rid of the revolver. When a deputy arrived 3 days later, after Dondi decided to file a missing persons report, Chris Tatro appeared calm. The trailer looked clean. Oh, yeah, they were here. I whipped their tail for taking my stuff, but then I took them and I dropped them back off at Dry Creek. And, yeah, somebody in a black Camaro came and picked them up. Calm, cool, collected. No one seemed to be intoxicated or under the influence. Nothing was out of place. So the deputy left. But days later, neither Roger Zamet nor John Harry returned home. Something isn't adding up. So, of course, police return. Now, this time they talked to Kenny Mason, and, well, it didn't go the same as when they talked to Chris Tatro. Not only did Kenny Mason end up incriminating himself, he incriminated several people. And things didn't take long to unravel after that. On January 24th, 1995, TBI agents Moore and the late, great Mark Gwynn arrested Christopher Tatro and took him into the DeKalb County Jail before soon transferring him to the Putnam County Jail. On January 27th, 1995, the bodies of Roger Zamet and John Harry were recovered from Center Hill Lake. Chris Tatro was served with a warrant to search his truck by Moore and Gwynn, and just moments after they turned to leave, Chris Tatro is banging on the cell door, asking to speak with them again. And when they came back, it turns out he did want to talk. Chris Tatro confessed to everything. Now, the jurors heard everything. The torture, the drugs, the paranoia. The defense argued that Chris Tatro wasn't in his right mind when the murders happened. And to support that, of course, they called 2 experts, Dr. Donna Seeger, a toxicologist, and Dr. William Kenner, a psychiatrist. So Dr. Seeger explained what heavy, long-term methamphetamine and cocaine use can do to a person. She testified that using as much as 2 grams of meth per day, which evidence showed the defendant was doing, is an extremely high dose. At that level, she said, paranoia sets in, delusions take over, and judgment becomes severely impaired. Users can become aggressive, hostile, even combative. Hallucinations are common, including the disturbing sensation that bugs are crawling all under your skin. Although Dr. Seeger did not personally examine the defendant, she testified that someone consuming those amounts would likely experience significant psychological effects. Dr. Kenner, on the other hand, did examine the defendant over several hours on 2 separate days. He also spoke with family members and a co-defendant, and what he described is a man absolutely unraveling. Now, according to Dr. Kenner, the defendant changed from a generally likable, easygoing person into someone increasingly paranoid and aggressive, sleep-deprived, and deeply addicted. He reported tactile hallucinations and even digging at his own skin with a knife. Dr. Kenner ultimately concluded that at the time of the murders, the defendant was suffering from amphetamine-induced paranoid psychosis, significantly impairing his ability to control his behavior or rationally examine his own actions. But the state pushed back. They called 2 of their own mental health professionals, Dr. Wissam Awais and Dr. Bob Freeman. Now, both of those interviewed the defendant twice and reviewed his medical records, though they did not speak with family members or others. Dr. Awais testified he found no evidence of mental illness and believed that Chris Tatro understood that what he was doing was wrong. Dr. Freeman agreed, though he did admit under cross-examination that Chris Tatro reported hallucinations and that mixing methamphetamine and Valium and cocaine would impair judgment. You think? In the end, the jury was not convinced by the insanity defense that they put forward. They found that Chris Tatro was guilty. 2 counts of deliberate and premeditated murder, 2 counts of felony murder, and 2 counts of especially aggravated kidnapping. And with that, the question of insanity gave way to accountability. At sentencing, jurors concluded the murders were heinous, atrocious, and cruel, but that mitigating factors outweighed the aggravating circumstance. So they sentenced him to life with the possibility of parole. Now, when the jury sentenced Chris Tatro to life with the possibility of parole, the courtroom didn't erupt. There was no gasp, no outcry, just a quiet, uneasy realization that the story wasn't truly finished. Because in Tennessee, life does not always mean forever. It means time. It means waiting. And eventually it means a hearing. Now, under Tennessee law at the time of Chris Tatro's conviction, a life sentence carried parole eligibility after serving 51 years, minus any sentence credits. That number is often misunderstood, sometimes misreported, and almost always emotionally charged. Now, for the families of Roger Zammit and John Harry, it meant something very specific. Chris Tatro would grow old behind bars, sure, but it did not mean that he would die there. And that knowledge sits differently with everyone who touches a case like this. Now, unlike some high-profile offenders, Chris Tatro did not vanish into obscurity. Court filings show that he has remained active in the legal system for years. Appeals, post-conviction petitions, challenges to jury instructions, and evidentiary rulings, everything that he can try to get himself out of there. Each one has been denied. No court ever overturned the facts of what happened in that trailer. No judge ever questioned the cruelty of the acts. No opinion softened the reality of how Roger Zammit and John Harry died. And inside the Tennessee Department of Corrections, Chris Tatro is aging. The rodeo champion became an inmate number. The man, once praised for his discipline and control, now lived inside a system built entirely on rules. Former acquaintances would later say he spoke less, moved slower, and avoided the bravado that had once defined him. There were no publicized disciplinary records suggesting continued violence inside the prison, but absence of violence does not equal rehabilitation. It means that containment is working. You know, parole is often described as a second chance. But in reality, let's face it, it is a legal gamble. At a parole hearing, the question is not, has this person served enough time? The question is, can this person safely exist outside of a prison? And in cases involving torture and prolonged confinement and execution-style killings, parole boards are forced to confront a brutal truth. Some crimes are not momentary lapses. They are character-revealing acts. Now, in Chris Tatro's case, any future parole hearing would require the board to examine the extended captivity of both of the victims, the psychological torture that they endured, the deliberate nature of the acts, the time it took for Roger Zammit to die, and the execution of John Harry after he tried his hardest to escape. These were not crimes of panic. They were crimes of control. Parole hearings don't just involve the inmate. They reopen wounds. Families are notified, statements are prepared, memories resurface, and unlike the offender, the victims do not age forward. Roger Zammit will always be the man kneeling in the bathtub. John Harry will always be the man running through that field for his life. Their families do not get the luxury of distance. They carry the details, they carry the photographs, they carry the knowledge that the law allows for a future conversation about release. Can you imagine? Parole doesn't ask families to forgive. It forces them to remember again and again and again. Every hearing, should one occur, will reopen the same record, the same testimony, the same photographs, the same wounds for the families. Nothing about what happened in January of 1995 becomes less true with time. Now, supporters of parole often argue that people change, like we said, and sometimes they do. But the justice system is not a therapy session. It is a reckoning, or it should be. Remorse alone does not erase capability, and aging does not undo brutality that was suffered. 2 young men are dead. Not because of one bad moment, but because dozens of moments passed without any intervention. Crimes like this don't begin with murder. They begin with silence and with fear and with people choosing not to stop what they know is wrong. And that's the part that should haunt us. No one screamed for help in the record. Not when they should have. They didn't write down the smell of the bathroom or the way the light hit the tile or how long 30 seconds feels when someone can't breathe. The law measured time in minutes, but the victims felt it in seconds. counted out between heartbeats, each one louder than the last. Somewhere in Tennessee, a cell door closes every night on a man who once decided when others would stop breathing. And somewhere else, families live with the knowledge that the law still believes that time might change him. But time doesn't erase kneeling on someone's back. It doesn't soften a cord that was pulled tight. It doesn't quiet a gunshot in an open field. These moments don't age. They wait. They wait in transcripts, in evidence boxes, in the spaces where forgiveness is asked but never owed. And one day, when the system asks whether enough years have passed, the answer will still be written in the same place it always was. On the floor. In the tub. In the dirt where a man fell and never got back up. There's something that this case forces me to confront, whether we want to or not. It's the power of choices and the company we keep. None of this happened in a vacuum. It didn't begin with the murder. It began with smaller decisions, with who you trust, with what you put into your body, with who you're willing to ride alongside when things start to spiral. Drugs don't just alter chemistry, they alter your judgment. They magnify paranoia. They dull your empathy for others. They strip away the guardrails that usually stop us from crossing certain lines. And when you surround yourself with others who are using, feeding off each other's highs and delusions, reality gets blurry fast. What might have once seemed unthinkable to you can suddenly feel justified or invisible. The truth is, there are moments in life where one decision can echo forever. Some choices can be corrected. Some mistakes can be repaired, but there are others, like the ones in this case, that can never be undone. If you are struggling with substance abuse, or if you're caught in a circle where drugs are becoming the norm instead of the exception, that is not weakness, that's a warning sign. And warnings are meant to be heeded. Help exists. Intervention exists. Recovery exists. I know because I know recovering addicts. You can do it. Change is possible, but only if you reach for it before the consequences reach you first. Because sometimes the difference between a hard chapter and a permanent tragedy is one decision. This episode, Long Way to Death, was written and hosted by me, Tiffany Morgan, and produced by Main Street Media. Background music and theme song by John T. Productions. Research support from Court Archives and Murderpedia.org. This finale was brought to you by the wonderful folks at Jones & Co. Real Estate. If you're buying or selling a home, come visit us at 304 Mulliken Street or give us a call at 931-474-2020. There is a wonderful team of qualified and friendly realtors ready to go to work for you. If you would like to sponsor an episode, we would love to partner with you. Our sponsors keep our shows funded and running so we can continue to tell the stories that matter. To support Tennessee True Crime, follow us on Facebook at Tennessee True Crime and Instagram at TN True Crime. You can find case and evidence photos on those socials. We are also now on Spotify and most other streaming platforms. Give us a follow, please listen, and leave us a rating. Now, if you have a case that you are interested in me covering, please feel free to email me at tntruecrime@mainstreetmedia.llc or reach out on any one of those social media platforms. Join me next week as we uncover another Tennessee case that left a lasting mark. Because here in Tennessee, we never stop telling the stories that matter, and some secrets we refuse to let stay buried. Tune in next time on Tennessee True Crime.
Down through the smoky hollers where the cold wind sighs, Footsteps fall where the moonlight hides, whispers over rivers, a secret lost in time. Welcome to Tennessee. True crime. Dark tales in the mountains where the mist won't lie. Echoes of the fallen under starless skies. Hear the hush of memory, the voice of the unsaid. This is Tennessee true crime, where the shadows tread.